And I understand I'm to share my time with Deputy Durkan, but he hasn't arrived yet, so if he does come, I'd like to share my time with him. And just first of all, I'm not circulating a speech because I'm speaking very much as a woman member of this House in relation to, in particular, the gender elements of this legislation. But I do also want to put on the record that today of all days, I think there are huge lessons to be learned in terms of the relationship between politics and big business. The Mahon Tribunal has a large number of recommendations, huge evidence in terms of corruption in this state and the manipulation of the planning process. I, certainly with responsibility for planning, will be looking very carefully at the recommendations in terms of necessary changes to legislation and other changes. And I know that my colleague, Minister Phil Hogan, will also be looking at the recommendations to ensure that, and indeed the government as a whole, to ensure that we learn the lessons from this highly expensive tribunal, very costly to the taxpayer, but I think even more costly to the citizens at large and to the political and generally to the entire country, to the political system and the entire country. It is a very momentous day for politics in Ireland, and we must learn the lessons from the tribunal report. But Cathaoirleach, as I said, in seeking to speak today, I wanted to speak specifically and particularly in relation to the gender quota element of the legislation, even though the word quota I think isn't actually used in the legislation. But I want to put on the record my satisfaction and my pleasure at being a member of the government that is introducing this legislation today. I have stood fairly and squarely behind the idea of quotas because I believe that it is the only way that we are going to get the critical mass that we need in order to have somewhere near equal representation of the genders in the political system. And it is absolutely important that we have appropriate representation from both genders in terms of making the laws that apply to everybody in this country, to the 50% of the population that's female as well as to the 50% that's male. And I think this is a very appropriate way to do it. And it is not telling the electorate that they have to vote for a woman. It's simply giving the electorate choices to vote for women. And I think that needs to be put on the record as well. I know, as a woman who has been involved in politics since 1985 and as a voter before that, that I find it extremely offensive that there are women in this country who don't have the option to vote for a woman. Particularly don't have the option to vote for a woman who shares the same kind of political views as they have themselves. There may well be a woman in their electoral area, but they may not want to vote for that woman. And I mean, I would make that point strongly, that women don't just vote for women because they're women, but women want to have the option to vote for a woman who shares their political philosophy. And that's essentially what this is about. And I think if you look at the tables in relation to other countries and see, for example, Sweden with 46.4% women in Parliament, Netherlands with 40.7% in Parliament, they do have political party quotas. And indeed, another example of success, I think, is the British Labour Party, which back several decades ago now implemented gender quotas within the party. They were rather unpolitically correctly described as Blair's babes at the time. But essentially what it did do was bring women into politics in Britain. And anybody who was watching the budget speeches in Britain in the last couple of days, or yesterday, will have seen still the number of women in the opposition benches. And I have done quite a bit of reading and studying in this area, and I'm quite convinced that having a quota system of candidates, not forcing people to vote for women, does bring up the level of participation. And as I say, I'm very strongly in favour of quotas. They don't have to last forever, and they shouldn't last forever. I see them as a temporary measure to ensure that you bring a level of participation that then provides the kind of balance that I think any healthy democracy requires. And I mean, I suppose I go back to the time when the quotas were introduced into the Labour Party here, and we have seen the result of it. This was internally within the party structures, but we have greatly increased participation of women, particularly in our own party, and I'm proud of that. But I do believe that we do have to introduce it more generally, and I believe that it will have a positive result. So I did just want to take the opportunity to put that on the record. I think that many women, incidentally, are put off, and indeed Deputy Calleary just referred to the difficulty of working in political life. Many women are put off the idea of politics because they perceive it as something that is primarily for men. But if you go into any community in Ireland, you will see a huge level of activism amongst women in their own communities, and there is absolutely no reason why that activism should not be translated into the political process. And I think the measure we're taking today will greatly assist in that. Garma.